Hi, y'all. Welcome back to Married to a Shrink. My name is Allie Johnson Calderon. I am a licensed therapist who specializes in couples and sex therapy. And alongside me is my partner and husband, Michael. And today we are going to talk about power struggles and the dynamics that happen when there is power influence within the relationship, which is there's always a power influence in any relationship, and what happens when those influences create a struggle. And introduce yourself for this episode, babe.
Hey, y'all. Michael here. Like Allie said, I'm not a therapist. I'm her partner. I'm a lucky guy that calls himself Allie's partner. And look forward to chatting with you today.
I love the word chit-chat. Such a fun word. Okay, so like I've already mentioned, a power struggle refers to when there is any kind of competition for influence or control in any given situation, right? It can be something as small as where we're going for dinner, right? Like who's controlling that decision, who's influencing that decision. And something as large as, I think one of our things is whether we add to our family or not, right? For those who don't know, because I don't think we have mentioned this yet, we are parents to two girls from your first marriage that live in our home full time. So we're always raising those two little peanuts. But on top of that, we're also a foster family, which means we have other kiddos who come in and out of the house. And with that comes, some power struggles that we have experienced. And so, again, I just want to set off with influence and control within a dynamic is normal. And it is every day and it is constant. And not all influence and control needs move into a struggle, right? It only moves into a struggle if there is a difference in the influence and or if someone does not want to relinquish the influence or control, I guess, and or it gets to a point where the influence and control is to such the state that it creates a pain point or a hurt feeling and or something deeper than that, right? And so my first question to you, my love, is how would you define a power struggle in the context of our marriage?
Sure. So like you mentioned, Allie, some of the power struggles that we have are on very day-to-day mundane things, such as where are we going to go to dinner or what are we going to have for dinner? I think it's certainly something that we all face every day. Particularly, we do in our home. Oftentimes I try to make assumptions in terms of what it is that Allie feels like. And I just don't ask. I know you hate it. I just don't know why I don't ask the question. Like, hey, what do you feel like? I instead try to put some games in my mind to figure out what it is that you really would like and that our family would like, taking into account our children. So sometimes power struggles in our home revolve around that. You mentioned fostering. I think that's been an area where we've had probably some of our biggest power struggles in terms of expanding our family. In terms of how we deal with them or how I deal with them, I came into this relationship not having the clinical background that you do. So I didn't even know what it was I was doing when I was in these moments with you where we were trying to work through something. But being your partner, being married to a shrink, it's given me insight and some skills on how to navigate those.
Yeah, I mean, surprise, surprise, I'm going to get clinical on you here. And I know why you do make assumptions and also why you kind of lean into sometimes again, not everything turns into a struggle, right? You can have a power dynamic of which one's like, I don't really care what we're doing in this situation. You can choose, right? And then there's no struggle that comes from that, right? But for you, because you have insecure attachment, and we've talked about this isn't a surprise for you, babe, is that because of your insecure attachment, you have this unconscious, and maybe sometimes conscious, but I know unconscious fear of rejection and abandonment. And because of that, you can be leery to give an opinion or have a stance about something. And I mean, I can think of a number of times in which, you have not given a stance or an opinion because because of your insecure attachment, you have a fear of the abandonment and rejection. And so you won't give it because you don't want to be abandoned and left and misaligned over it. And you don't want us to be misaligned. So you won't give it. And then you'll come back later and be like, what the heck? I don't like this decision. I don't like how this decision made me feel. And then I'm left stranded with but I gave you the opportunity and you chose not to, your attachment style and I don't want to say trauma, but the dynamics of that then play into some of that outline, and it creates a power struggle later. When at the time, when we're making that decision, it's not a power struggle. I'm like, oh, we're on the same page. Like, he doesn't care. And then later on down the road, you struggle with the decision or anything like that. Would you agree, or am I mischaracterizing you?
I would certainly agree. I know, back to the choosing where we're going to go for dinner. Oftentimes we'll be like, I don't care. I play it off like it doesn't matter. I'm sitting on the sidelines, not wanting to voice an opinion because I don't want to misalign. And then you end up making a decision and we go there, and then I start to be maybe a little, there's nothing I like here, or they don't have anything that fits my diet, or, so yes, I certainly agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. And then I think to play back into what you were speaking to earlier about your organic, way of making assumptions. Again, I think it feeds back into that insecure attachment where you don't want to be rejected. You don't want to be abandoned by me. And so you will try to assume what I want and what I'm thinking so you can get ahead of it. So there is no opportunity for rejection and abandonment. Right.
And again, it's I know this by now that just ask the question. Don't make the assumption.
Just ask, right? Because I will very much tell you.
You openly express your opinions when asked.
Yes, but I'm respectful, and so I don't go around just telling people what I think.
Sure.
Right? But you're right. If you ask me, I will tell you what I think, and so, but you'll make these assumptions, and so what happens is, that's some of our smaller ones, but what happens is when you make assumptions on some of our larger concerns, or I don't want to say concerns, but decisions that we have to make. I'll give an example. So we had the opportunity to potentially make one of our placements a permanent member of our family, right? And there's a lot that goes into that. I won't get into the nitty-gritty because of privacy and for other things. But I recall that you were assuming that I would want to say yes. And so you automatically came into this conversation that was a power struggle of influence, because you were like assuming Allie wants to say yes to this very large decision. And I want to say no. And instead of coming in with a basis of where are we and being open to that, you were assuming I wanted to say yes to this permanency. And so you came in hot and heavy and telling me all the reasons why we should say no. And it automatically created a very intense power struggle.
It did. And then if I recall correctly, when I kind of came in with that approach and looking back, it was not the right approach. You, in fact, felt very similar to how I felt or had a lot of the same opinions.
100%.
And again, I was non-therapeutic about it. Just went in voicing my opinion instead of having that conversation. And the end result would have been the same, but we would have gotten there with a lot less tension and
A whole lot
power
less
struggle.
tension. Yes, because there were a few days where it was, we were uncomfortable, right? Like we weren't fighting, but there was just this discomfort in our home because I feel like it came in real hot. And I don't expect you to be therapeutic. You're not a therapist, but you didn't utilize any of your skill sets. And so you came in with to me, it felt like judgments in terms of like, Allie, I'm already thinking that this is what you are thinking and feeling. So I'm going to have reasons as to why you shouldn't think and feel this way and why this shouldn't be your decision. And so it automatically made me feel unseen, unheard, but even more so, I felt misaligned on something so major. And to your point, we were on the same page, but again, it's where those assumptions came in. And so I found that therapeutically and with clients and with us and in relationships, where power, influence, and control moves into a struggle is really when, one, assumptions are made and there's not the direct ask in a loving way of, hey, what are you thinking about this, right? And then moving into the need to be right.
Mm-hmm. I would totally, yes, the need to be right. And then I would also add being defensive or getting defensive because you're trying to be right and you try to protect your viewpoint.
But then again, I start to be like, why is the viewpoint more important than the relationship? That's where I have a hard time, right? Like, because, for example, what I feel like happens in our relationship, and again, I have no way of not operating like a therapist, even in our own marriage. I'm sorry about that. But I find looking back and looking at our situations and our dialogue and our interactions when it comes to influence and power, it feels like there's a pattern where you would have been asked for an opinion, not given it because of fear of rejection and abandonment. And then you come back later and you may or may not be openly upset about it, but then what happens is another opportunity of influence and control presents. And then that's when you buckle down and it turns and you have to be right because it feels like you have to obtain some influence and control in some capacity and you lost it. I'm using quotations there, right? Because you didn't really lose power and control, but maybe feels like you did. Are you tracking me so far?
I'm following.
And then so then it will be something totally mundane. And I'm making this up on the spot because I can't think of a really great example right now, but like how many minutes we were in the car, let's say. And I'll be like, oh, it was probably 20. You're like, it was 34. And I'll be like, where are you getting that information? Oh, I know it's 34 minutes. And I'm like, why are we buckling down on? Like, why are we going? And there's a little bit of an aggression to it, right? And just like I have to be right. And it feels like that happens more often when you make the choice not to give your opinion because you're leaning into your insecure attachment and you're leaning into that. And so you're not giving an opinion when one is offered. Right? Like there's an opportunity for one. Or you'll make an assumption, it turns out to be the wrong one. And so the influence and control shifts, right? And then you'll seize an opportunity to like regain it, but it's always the wrong opportunity. Do you know what I mean? And then it creates this awkward, like, dynamic for the next like hour.
That's really great insight. I could definitely agree with that's how it often plays out.
Really? Is that like, do you see that now that I'm presenting it in that way?
I do.
Right? because you'll double down on something completely, like, in my mind, and this is a judgment word, and I'm going to use it anyway, like ridiculous. Like, I'm just like, what, why? Why are we having contention over this? You know? But what it feels like looking back is that, oh, well, I missed my opportunity there for some sort of influence and control. So I'm going to grab it here at any cost. And I think where I get frustrated as your partner is sometimes it feels like the cost isn't worth it, right? It's like you have to have this power and control at the cost of like us enjoying dinner or us having a pleasant, car ride to church or to a school event or something like that. Agree or disagree?
No, I would agree. If I could go back and replay some of these moments or come back with an eraser and change them ever so slightly and ask the questions and not make the assumptions, that's really what I'm working towards.
I know that, baby. There is no disagreement or argument can ever be made that you don't work hard at obtaining skill sets and on our marriage. Like I have never had doubt that you are not really trying, right? But just those, it is. I think there's a struggle for you to be right and feel that control and influence over the sake of like for our relationship, right? And so why do you need to feel that control and influence in the capacity that you do? Do you not feel it in any other way?
I think it goes back to what you were saying where we have an opportunity to connect with voicing an opinion. I'm looking at myself here. I have an opportunity to voice an opinion on something. I sit on the sidelines, don't voice it, or make an assumption what the decision wants to be, whether it's your decision or the girl's decision. I make that assumption what it is. And then I think you're absolutely right with hitting the nail on the head where I don't necessarily want that, and I then try to get it back with something mundane. Who was in this movie? And I know you hate when I play that.
It's every time. So y'all, every time we watch a movie, we are unable to get more than 4 minutes in before Michael comes in with where all the actors were in other movies, who they were, what characters they were in other movies, and he starts talking over it. I'm like, we got to pause, and then for you to come in. So is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
But how is that playing into what you're talking about? Like you want to be right about, like you want to obtain that like rightness?
I think
subconsciously. Like, oh yeah, we've seen them there.
I think subconsciously, yeah, I'm trying to get some sort of control. I don't even necessarily realize I'm doing it, but I think that's what I'm doing. Like,
because it's like your control also moves into like this rightness. Like, see, I'm right. Like, validate me. I want to be validated in this situation. And what's ironic about it is no one's challenging you. No one's sitting there being like, no, I don't think that's the case. They weren't in that movie or they weren't in that thing. But like, it's always a thing because you want, and so let's kind of circle back to the ideology that, yes, we know that insecure attachment, but why do we still kind of operate in that capacity?
I think it's trying to teach an old dog new tricks. I mean, I've operated in such a way where that's the way I would be for so long. It's trying to break those habits.
Yeah.
So at least now I have the optics to see it, both from being in our partnership, from being in therapy. I start to have, I now have some tools in my toolbox, and I'm working to pull out those tools on a more regular basis. So, holding on, letting go, and compromising, or essentially those are the three different directions you can go when we're in these moments of, power struggle. The holding on is when I'm putting my feet down into the ground and, I'm going to stay here until I'm acknowledged that I'm right, which isn't necessarily the right approach. Letting go, just kind of walking away for a moment, taking a breath, so I can get the emotions aside and really view it in that moment, what it is that we need to talk about. And then, compromise, just not making the assumption and talking through it and coming to that decision.
And I think where I struggle is that, one, when you're not right, I have a hard time. I think I have a hard time letting that be. Sometimes I can, and I can just be like, well, he's not right, but I'm gonna let him, die on this sword. Because it's not a big deal. But then there's other times when I feel like you buckle down, and I just like, I don't know how many times I've told you, like, this isn't a right or wrong situation, right? Like, this is a situation where it is just an influence and a control dynamic that we're having to navigate. And because the assumptions, and because you won't give an opinion, or if you do, it is with the assumptive that you know what I'm thinking and feeling, that it creates this, like, where it feels like you have to be right. And in that have to be right, it is very disconnecting, and it can be challenging to then want to put the emotional effort in to navigating back towards, equilibrium. And so I find that sometimes I concede and will be like, all right, you're right. Because I feel like you need to hear those words. But like the justice part of me and the accountability part of me, and we'll talk about values in some episode. And for those who don't know me, one of my largest values is I have three, and one of them is accountability. It is a core for who I am, what I teach in dynamics. It is so much about just relations and relationships, and society is all nested in an accountability for who we are, what we do, our actions, our decisions, our thoughts, like all of that, right? Because it's our contribution to everything. And so I digress. But when you're moving in to that, I struggle sometimes with where the need to be right, where I feel like I don't want to concede, because for me it falls into the realm of, well, there's a lack of accountability there. And that, again, because it's one of my values, I have a hard time, conceding on being like, okay, fine. Like, let's not talk about this anymore. And I'm not talking about some of those mundane things, but I'm talking about when there is a discrepancy on how something was viewed or how something played out, and there's a lack of accountability from my perspective, from you, I can have a hard time being like, all right, fine, Michael. Like,
no, and I think in those moments, Allie, when you do, in quotes, concede, I can see not necessarily the resentment. That's not the right word, but you're a little disgruntled inside.
Oh, I'm agitated.
And you're definitely agitated.
I'm agitated.
You get agitated, and it in a roundabout way is disconnecting. When that happens.
Well, I don't know if it's roundabout. I think it's pretty direct. Like if I'm agitated with you, and then I don't. It's hard
disconnecting.
It's hard to be connected when someone's frustrated or agitated with you, right? And so I think that's where I feel then my intellect and my therapeutic background then gets weaponized against me. And then that will push me over the edge like nobody's business. Would you agree with that?
I oftentimes, from time to time, I use that as I don't mean to use that as a weapon, but
But you do. I think you do mean to use it as a weapon. I don't think you purposely do. You don't have malicious intent. But.
Yeah, no, like you have this skill set and you pull out your therapeutic terms, and it's like, I don't know how to compete with this. Like I'm not gonna win this.
Exactly.
And it's not a matter of winning. It's not a matter of winning. But in the moment, that's what it is.
But because even then, even as you speak to this right now, your narrative is that it's a competition.
Yeah.
And it's like, sometimes I want to be like, we're on the same team, and like wave a flag and be like, we're on the same team.
We're wearing the same colors.
Like, we're like, why is the narrative then competition, and then I have to win? And that's where I feel like we can get our power struggles are at the worst, is when we get misaligned in that way. When I'm vying for control and influence over starting to equalize and really make us connected for the sake of the relationship and the harmony of the household, and because you know how I feel about modeling, how influential it is. Mm-hmm. A lot of our behaviors, or a high majority of our behaviors, I should say, are from what was shown to us. And so big on modeling in our home, right? I'm very sensitive to about what we are displaying and showing the children in our home.
Completely agree.
And so with that, we will move like there. I am operating within the realm of, let's equalize, right? And you're operating within the realm of, I need to win. And with this competition type of mentality, or not competition mentality, but like the win, the right, I need to be right situation. And then that's when you start to pull out your weapons. And like we have just recently discussed, one of those weapons is my intellect and my therapeutic skill set. And so it will be, which then becomes very unfair. And that's when I get frustrated and I get agitated, because I will call you out on it and be like, hey, that's not fair. Why are you pulling that card, right? Well, why are you playing that card? Why are we weaponizing something that you love about me? But in that instance, you're feeling this need to like regain control, regain the influence. And so you're pulling out any stop you can. And so you're utilizing something you love about me, which is my intellect and the way I do therapeutically think, and you use it against me. Mm-hmm. And then that's when I get frustrated at best and hurt. Like I get my feelings hurt at worst, right? Because it just disconnects. And so I think this is where power and influence moves into a struggle that we always resolve. But I feel sometimes that to get to the resolve feels so unnecessary.
In those moments, do you think it's my fight or flight response, and that's my reaction or my go-to?
Yeah. Yes. I think it's a combination of things. I think it is largely played into insecure attachment, right? In terms of you have such a fear of being rejected and abandoned by me, right? And so much so, it can disconnect us in ways like we're talking about now. Mm-hmm. It's ironic. That's the word I'm looking for, right? And I think you do, for you, I think you have come to terms with this now, but for a long time, you have felt like conflict is always bad.
I did originally feel that way. Absolutely.
And I think now you understand that if you don't move through, you can't connect.
Absolutely. I don't think a good relationship will have conflict, and it's how you resolve that conflict, and
yes.
That's what strengthens the relationship.
Exactly. And I think in those moments, a few things happen. You're afraid of rejection and abandonment. I think your fight or flight does kick in because of past trauma from past relationships. And thirdly, I think that your family of origin and what was modeled for you in terms of how those dynamics work, because your parents are insanely lovely and very delightful, but they're not communicators.
No.
would you
totally acknowledge that?
Yeah. And so I think you were not modeled these dynamics. And I would also say that your parents also operate with a very traditional marriage and very traditional gender roles.
Without a doubt.
And
we don't operate that way.
And so a lot of times that also plays in. So yes, to circle back to your question, yes, do I think fight or flight does play in? Yes, because I think what happens is you get freaked out, and then the freak out of the fear and the abandonment and the potential conflict that you have never really seen and never really known how to navigate, the fear response plays in. And that's where your reactivity comes in. And then from the reactivity, we move into, okay, let's just relinquish control, or let's double down and fight. And that's where I'm like, I'm out. I don't want to fight. I have no interest in fighting.
No, and I don't either.
And I know you don't. I know you don't. Like, it's just like you have said, it's that combination of all those factors playing out in that power or that influence coming to an opportunity.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
You're just staring at it.
No, I think it's... I'm not giving you an evil eye.
You're not giving me an evil eye, no.
No, I think it's a matter of, repetition and doing better in those moments, recognizing when those moments are there to change that response is at least my point of view. I think that's what, the process where that's what that journey is, to change how those moments play out.
Fair. Because for you, what's the most challenging thing about when we are moving into a power struggle?
Voicing my opinion.
Do you feel unsafe?
No, not at all.
Because that's what's hard. I think that's what's hard for me sometimes is like, okay, if you feel emotionally safe within our dynamic, why is it so hard for you to voice an opinion? Because we're not talking about like major opinions. We're talking about even like
small
itty bitty,
opinions.
tiny little like, how are we spending the next 15 minutes?
Yeah, I don't know if it's, you mentioned the fear of rejection. I don't know if there's a sense of vulnerability. But again, being vulnerable with the person you love is a good thing. And it is a safe space. So that's definitely something I don't really have an answer to. I think I have to do some more digging on that one.
Because it's interesting to me that like I can understand the vulnerability component, But what's interesting to me is that you equate any opinion with being vulnerable, where I personally wouldn't, right? Like, I can acknowledge that some opinions do have a vulnerability to them. But so for those who I haven't mentioned this, I operate with a secure attachment. And so because of that, I don't struggle to say my opinion. And I'm also okay if the opinion is not matched. That does not make me uncomfortable.
It does not.
Like, and I find that when the opinion is not matched, it's not conflict. It's a navigation, and it's just a dialogue.
I was going to say it's conversation.
It's conversation. Whereas for you, when it doesn't match, it is conflict. And so we're already starting at a different level. And so to your point, if you're coming at any opinion and the opportunity for it to be mismatched equates conflict, well, then, yeah, that would be vulnerable. Right?
For sure.
But I don't operate with that because for me, it equates conversation and dialogue. It doesn't equate conflict. And again, I think that's where some of the day-to-day in our partnership can be, it can take more emotional
than it needs
to. Yeah. Exactly. Right? Because it's like, why are we going with the narrative that a misalignment, and I think, again, that's why you make some of the assumptions that you make. Because you're trying to get ahead of a possible misalignment. Because in your narrative, misalignment means conflict. Where in my narrative, a misalignment is natural and normal. It just means a conversation. But by you utilizing some of these tactics that aren't serving you, they're not serving you, and they don't serve us, but for whatever reason, you have a hard time letting them go.
Yeah, I think, again, it's you use the same, what you saw growing up and what you've used for years, and I think I'm getting better at not having that be my go-to, but it still does bubble up and use from time to time.
So did your parents never disagree? I mean, I don't disagree. Did your mom express opinions?
No.
Okay.
There weren't opinions expressed.
Okay. So did your family of origin operate under your dad's opinions?
I would say largely.
Okay. And then were your opinions asked for?
As a child, our opinions weren't really asked.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. That tracks with what I'm experienced with you in partnership, right? Because, yeah. So, and then you come into our marriage where I very much value your opinion. Not only do I value it, but I expect it. And then when you don't give it,
you think there's a lack of care or a lack
I do. I think sometimes I do. I think I know now, no, but I think initially I did. Right? Because I'm like, well, why? Or what would happen is you wouldn't give it, and then it would come back and bite me in the tush further down the road, and I'd be like, what the heck, dude? You know? So, as we start to wrap up with what kind of felt a little bit like I was giving therapy, but
it somewhat did feel like a therapy session.
A little bit. Yeah, you have to come home with me, so it's a little bit of a different dynamic. What have you learned from experiences that we have had with power struggles, and then what advice or thoughts would you give to those who operate kind of similarly to you, or maybe with an insecure attachment, or with, some of these traumas, or with a fear of giving an opinion because it could lead to vulnerability, and associate with the narrative that any kind of misalignment is conflict as opposed to conversation and dialogue?
I would say the big learning takeaways for myself, not to make the assumption to ask the question. I'm in a safe relationship. We have a great relationship. Voice my opinion. It's not, when we are misaligned on something, it's not conflict. It's conversation. So I think for me, the first and foremost thing is the not making the assumption. And then when we are kind of navigating a misalignment, it's following those 3 different steps. Is this something that I truly value, that I want to hold on to? Is it something where I'm starting to get emotionally charged over, and I need to just walk away for a moment, take a breath, and then come back to it with a clear mind where I'm able to rationally think? Or just, is this something we just need to talk through and come to some sort of a compromise on, where it's a give and take? I think therapeutically, from what I've learned from being your partner, that's the approach, is that right there.
Yeah. Yeah, because once things start to get emotionally charged, it's not productive.
It's not productive at all.
Yeah. And so at that point, you gotta walk and get space, right? No, and I think, it's always a constant challenge, but we're always working towards equilibrium and making sure that we're on the same page, and that we have balance, especially in gender roles within our partnership, because we operate under the partnership model, not the traditional marriage model, which, again, we'll talk about this in another episode in terms of what the difference between marriage and partnership is, right? And how you can have a marriage, you can have a partnership, or you can have a marriage and a partnership, right? There's different dynamics in there. And because we have chosen marriage and partnership, it does create some of those power dynamics that I think they just take some navigating. And I would love to just get to the place where the dynamics aren't moving towards struggles, right?
Absolutely.
And when we are struggling and having a power struggle, the acknowledgement that that's normal and natural and appropriate, because we have a misalignment, and that doesn't mean conflict. That means we have an opportunity to connect through meaningful dialogue. And if we ever find that we're getting heated or charged, we need to separate for however long it takes, and then come back for the continued conversation, right? And to leave the assumptions at the door, and to leave the fear of not being able to reconcile. Because I think that also plays into some of the dynamics sometimes, is that couples will really struggle to even have the conversation because they have the fear that they can't patch it back up afterwards.
Sure.
Right? Or they're going to walk away with being more disconnected. And so it's like, okay, well, we won't even touch it then. And that's where resentment can really build, and also people can really get hurt.
Sure. And I think another takeaway you mentioned, taking that moment to walk away, clear your head, put the emotions to the side. I know we have a practice where we'll say we're going to talk about this at such and such a time. We'll come back to this.
Yeah.
I know earlier on in our relationship, oftentimes I would be bad about coming back to it.
You were avoidant.
I would be avoidant. I would have put it under the rug, just move on, change the topic, and it's gone. And I know that's not the right approach, but I know that was a practice earlier on in our relationship that I struggled with.
Yeah, because like you were saying, if you're automatically knowing, if in your narrative it is conflict, to come back and work towards resolve, and this actually leads us into our next episode, which is the art of a good apology and how to really apologize, and for it to be connecting. And part of that is coming back to the conversation, even though you're uncomfortable, even though you want to avoid it. Because like you just mentioned, that's your coping mechanism, is when you're uncomfortable or scared, you avoid. Mm-hmm. That's what you go to. Where I go into fight mode. When I'm uncomfortable or scared, I get scrappy.
But it's good that we know what our
we
go-tos.
We do. We know our go-tos. But with that, to your point, that's what can be when you have to know you have to know how you cope with it. Yes, but also you have to be able to acknowledge and then overcome and come back to it, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, I have to be like, you need to settle down, Allie, and take some time before you can come back and be conversational, because I think, to your point, there's probably a reason why you weaponize my intellect, just because I think I do sometimes use it as a weapon. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, I can come back swinging verbally, not in an abusive way, but in a, like, I'm just going to hit you with all these really, like...
Hit me with the facts.
Hit you with so much information and so many stats and so many things that you can't not engage with me. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's what I mean by I'll come at you. Like, I'll be like, no, you will engage with me. And your coping mechanism is, like, avoiding. And so the two, like, come to a head. And then it can start to feel for you like I'm insanely aggressive, because I probably am coming across as aggressive, right? Because of just my onslaught of, like, I'm not loud, but I'm like, yeah, but this is why, and this, and this, and this, and the stats say this, and right? And it's just like, and you're just like, okay, I didn't even want to have this conversation. I don't even want to be here right now, right? And so all of that, those types of things happen in our dynamic, and then we have to apologize and come back in and apologize, which is why this is what we are going to talk about next episode, is how to apologize, because there is a proper formula for apologizing. And when, a power struggle goes awry, or we have a miscommunication, or when someone's hurt a feeling, how we come back and apologize without getting defensive and really working towards repairing that and really allowing for the relationship to be precedent versus the individual, right? Which is really the dynamic of a really healing apology. So with that, thank y'all for joining us on Married to a Shrink. And I love you, babe. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Love you. 90-10.
You never go the full 100.